Members, the question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Leanne Dalzell.
Mr Speaker, as the former Associate Minister of Justice who introduced the bill that this bill replaces and who helped write the very broad terms of reference for the most in-depth inquiry into our alcohol laws New Zealand has ever seen, I should be standing in this House today to describe this bill as a tribute to the members of the Law Commission and the more than 3,000 New Zealanders who made their views known to them. It is a travesty that I cannot, but the truth is that this bill does not even begin to meet the challenge posed by the evidence that the Law Commission presented to the government about what needs to be done. I wanted this report and I wanted the Law Commission to write the bill, and now I know why the government didn't give them time to do so that MPs collectively could say to the public, we've introduced a bill based on the evidence about what needs to be done, and now we're calling on the public to respond to that. Let the political considerations and the application of the conscience vote come into play once those submissions are heard. But instead, we have a government that decides to gut the Law Commission's report in the shape of a government bill that adds very little to the bill that I introduced over 2 years ago. Mr Speaker, there are around half a dozen matters contained in this bill that weren't in my bill that I introduced, the government bill of the day, the bill that this government took to Select Committee and has allowed to languish there going nowhere, Mr Speaker. Every single one of those additional matters in the bill that we have today, every single one of them could have been dealt with by way of SOP to the original bill because they're all within scope of the bill. The Minister spoke about local alcohol plans. I've chipped him saying, what a good idea, I wish I'd thought of that. It was in the bill 2 years ago that we have local alcohol plans. Mr Speaker, the government has completely failed to acknowledge the unprecedented community response to the harm that alcohol has wrought on their communities. Marches in the street against the granting of yet another liquor licence from one end of the country to the other. The thousands who've attended the meetings organised by what started as a small group of health professionals who saw the real cost that alcohol imposes on our health system. $1.2 billion a year. The Minister must be joking if he thinks that's the extent of the harm that we all pay for from our tax dollars, Mr Speaker. Or the healthy and safer city networks from one end of the country to the other who have to highlight the property damage that occurs in their communities and the unsafe environments where people gather in an intoxicated way in their city centres weekend after weekend, Mr Speaker. The individuals like Dr Albert Mackari from Timaru, who is putting his own resources into a campaign to win hearts and minds about this issue which he sees destroying families and communities. Mr Speaker, this government has completely underestimated the level of community awareness about the extent of the problem and what needs to be done to curb the harm. And I use that phrase, curb the harm, because that is the title of the Law Commission report, Alcohol, Curbing the Harm, that sees so few of its recommendations in this bill. Mr Speaker, I'm probably one of the few MPs who's read every page of the Law Commission report, but after looking at this bill, I'd say, what was the point? At least, all that's really done has been to show me how little has been done in response to it. The New Zealand Food and Grocery Council must be slapping itself on the back, knowing now that they have more influence than the Law Commission, and they don't even have to provide the evidence to back up their contribution to their problem, which is enormous. Everyone who is anyone has described this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to grapple with the multitude of alcohol-related problems that must be addressed. And this government has said it is okay to squander that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it is not okay. And I think that's a very good line to use in this debate because of the correlation between alcohol use and domestic violence. It's not okay, Mr Speaker. There are 4 elements that would have been in this bill had the government been truly willing to deal with the real issues instead of the side-swiping of issues, the sham that we see, the sidelining of issues like getting us to look at age as an important issue. It's not the top issue at all. The 4 issues are these: price. They are addressing rampant commercialisation of alcohol and treating it as an ordinary commodity, advertising and marketing, and dangerous drink driving countermeasures. When I say price, I'm not going to argue for an across-the-board increase in price through tax. Excise tax is very useful for several purposes, but it's next to useless in face of the power of the supermarkets to push up the price of alcohol, regardless of increase in excise tax. Mr. Speaker, the priority is to increase the price of the dirt cheap alcohol. That's why I'm arguing for minimum pricing. The $5.99 bottles of wine, where 3 young women buy 5 bottles of wine to preload on rather than the 2 bottles of very good wine that they would be able to buy for the same price. And the ones that buy those 5 bottles of $5.99 wine, they are the most price-sensitive buyers. They are the ones who will change their behaviour when the price goes up. Don't let anyone tell you that this will do otherwise. This is the reason for the minimum price per standard drink. $2 per minimum standard drink doesn't touch a $15 bottle of wine. That stays the same price, but it slightly more than doubles the price of the $5.99 bottle of wine. And the second issue, the rampant commercialisation of alcohol, is evident by the fact that it's usually the first thing we see when we enter a supermarket these days. We don't have to wait to get to the alcohol aisles because they've got the specials right there at the front door ready to greet us and to remind us that this is the place that you get dirt cheap alcohol poured into the community. Mr. Speaker, they don't break the law. I never actually understood the role of supermarkets when I was Minister, and it's the one thing I regret from that time, and that is that they make it their business not to break the law. And I know why. Because they have got a licence to print money. Because they have no responsibility for what happens when their liquor leaves the premises. They are not responsible for their actions. They don't have to take responsibility, and they don't. The politicians have let them sell wine as a matter of convenience. I wasn't here when that decision was made. I would have voted against it. We let them sell beer for convenience as well, but that has actually driven down the price and increased the availability while they can legally wash their hands of the fallout that has occurred. Mr. Speaker, if the public of New Zealand told us as politicians that the trade-off has been too great, convenience for harm, if they said to us that trade-off is too great, I would vote to take it out of the supermarkets. It is convenient to buy wine at the supermarkets. I do it myself. But the price that we have had to pay for that as a nation is this: the cutthroat, loss-leading, deep discounting retail practices of a sector who doesn't care about what happens out there in the community. No wonder the New Zealand Food and Grocery Council have done so well out of this bill. Mr. Speaker, advertising alcohol makes not one bit of difference to the drinking culture. Yeah, right. I'm a real fan of irony. That yeah, right advertises beer. But yeah, right, advertising alcohol makes not one bit of difference to the drinking culture. Until you frame alcohol as the recreational drug, New Zealand's #1 recreational drug that it is, and recognise that marketing its consumption and overconsumption runs counterintuitive to minimising the harm objectives that any regulatory framework governing the legal supply of such a product must have. And finally, dangerous driving countermeasures which focus on impairment. Most New Zealanders have been horrified to find out how much a person can drink while still legally be able to drive. Albert Macquarie on stage in Timaru asked myself and a National Party MP to come on stage carrying the door of a car, and I had this real sense of dread that he was going to tell us that there was someone behind that car door that died, but it wasn't. It was his daughter, and she almost died. But so many do. We have to take further measures on our roads to protect people from the harm that occurred. Mr Speaker, the night that I was in Timaru, I ended with a response to a question. I answered a question that Albert Macquarie had been asking, which is why won't the politicians change those laws, like lowering the blood alcohol concentration from 0.08 to 0.05 and establishing a minimum price for alcohol.